Hey, Lashpreneurs, happy Monday to you. On today's episode, we're going to cover the 5 things to know before hiring your first team member. So let's dive in. The 5 things that you need to know before hiring your first team member really stemmed from when I opened up Momentum Mastermind in November of last year, applications for this mastermind. It is a mastermind for those that are building out teams, whether you are looking to hire your first team member or you have a salon or multiple locations with multiple team members. There were things I was consistently coming across with those that had applied that they hadn't even been made aware of or just didn't even know prior to hiring their first team member. There is this illusion that, oh, when you get fully booked, then you hire a warm body to come in there and help with your overflow. And eventually someday out in the future, you might be able to work less and still have the business be making money. That's kind of, I think, the illusion that everybody buys into when it's like, oh, when you get fully booked, next step is hiring a team member. So I really wanted to address today the 5 things that you should know before hiring your first team member so that you are setting not just your team member up for success, but you as the now manager, boss lady, and your business for success. And tip number 1, the one thing that you need to know, just even in general in running a business, is business finance. And it comes off more complicated than it needs to be. There is a season in being a business owner, if you're not doing it as the first step, that you're going to need to understand the coming and going of money in your business. If you do not even know the basics of reading a profit and loss statement, or even knowing if your business is profitable, or even knowing if you can pay yourself consistently, then you shouldn't be adding layers of complication when it comes to team members, which then you will have taxes and more insurance and just more money coming and going into the business. Because what you do on the small stuff and how you treat the small things in your business, adding more fuel to that flame is not going to help put out the fire. So we want to make sure that we have a confident understanding of the comings and goings of money in your business. And I promise you, it is so much easier to learn that stuff when it's just you that's making the money and spending the money. Because as you get more team members on, there's more money and more transactions happening, and it gets a lot more overwhelming and a lot more complicated. And there's a lot more responsibilities and a lot higher cost problems that happen when you start to build out and grow your business. Now, that's not meant to scare you, but it is that serious that you should have at a minimum, and that's even being really generous, at a minimum, have a basic understanding of money coming into the business and money going out, and that you're consistently tracking that money. And by consistently, I mean monthly, if not more so. When you hire on a team member legally, you will be required to run payroll. And the easiest way to do that is to do it with you first. Now, I will get into that in tip number 3, I think, but you want to make sure that you, at a minimum, are paying yourself consistently, that your business is profitable, and that you know the money coming in and the money going out on a month-to-month basis. If you don't know that, it is not time for you to hire on a team member. It is time for you to dive in to the financial runnings of your business so that you can have the data of the business and the health of the business inform your decisions of growth, rather than your feelings or desperation to get somebody in to help you because you're turning away business. You may be turning away business, yet if you're not consistently paying yourself, you're not doing a good job of running your business now. Even though you have a lot of demand, something's broken there. If there's more demand than you have time, yet you're not consistently paying yourself, right? So thing number 2 you should know before hiring your first team member are the laws and regulations in your city, state, country when it comes to having team members. I'm going to speak specifically to the US. I don't know Canadian, Australian, UK. I don't know laws and regulations when it comes to employees or team members in other countries. However, I am very familiar with the laws and regulations of the US. However, disclaimer, I am not an attorney. I am not licensed in your state, and I am not an accountant. So those would be the areas that I would refer you to at a minimum to look at your employment regulating agency in your state to really know again, the basics of the laws that you're now going to be held accountable for. One of the very first guests I had on the podcast back in 2018 was Paul and Tessany Lubers of Lashcast podcast. And Tuscany said the most accurate statement I think I've ever heard when it comes to building out a team that I still use pretty much monthly at this point. She said, just because you don't know the laws doesn't mean they don't apply to you. And I could not, that encapsulated how wrong our industry does it, because so many salon owners misclassify their employees because they go along that journey of like, I'm fully booked. I have so much demand. I just need to get a warm body in here. I'll pay him 50% commission. They'll be an independent contractor. All wrong, right? All bad business decisions. And I have seen it so many times. And I have actually advised people to go look at the laws, because most of the time I get people who are like, man, I think I'm just going to go out on my own because my salon boss doesn't care about me. I'm working so much, but I'm not making any pay, or I'm not making much money, or I have to sit there and not get paid, and they're not getting paid minimum wage. And most of the time I find out that they're independent contractors. And I say, you know what, you do have the option to sue if you wanted. And I hesitate to even recommend that, or even at least make it somebody's awareness, because it's serious, right? And that can take out somebody's business. And I know that power, but I also see how abusive salon owners are in their attempts to control someone that they are not able to control because they haven't legally classified them as an employee, which is where the control comes in. And so in a lot of ways, these salon owners are taking advantage of employees that they have misclassified so they can avoid paying certain taxes, so that there is less financial commitment to hiring a team member, and yet they treat them just like employees. And so in some cases, I'm like, sometimes you got to learn the hard way. But really, when somebody's reaching out to me and they're in a really toxic situation, I just educate them on what maybe their possible options are. And what I don't want is for you listening to this to think that that can't happen for you too, because we always want to, I come from the ilk of minimizing the risk when it comes to entrepreneurship and being a business owner. There is a heck of a lot of risk in being a business owner, just that alone. So I don't want you to put yourself in a situation where you're risking your livelihood, where you're risking your ability to provide for yourself and your family, nor your house, your cars, your assets personally. Because if somebody comes after you because you've broken the laws because you didn't know there were laws, or you didn't follow them, or you were just naive, or you didn't do your due diligence, that's a pretty scary situation to be in. So when it comes to laws and regulations, it is your responsibility. The burden falls on you as the business owner to have a understanding of what your responsibilities are as an employer, what you can and cannot do. And yes, laws change all the time, regulations change all the time. And this is where I'm going to get into point number 3. There are ways that you can hire out consultants or other people who will help you know how to stay compliant with the ever-changing laws. But there are some basic federal laws, so that is countrywide employment laws, that you do need to follow. Some of those are minimum wage, right? They have to be paid the minimum wage of your state or higher. So if you're going to do a commission-based pay structure, you have to pay them at least minimum wage or commission, whichever is higher. You can never not pay somebody a minimum wage. So the simplest math, if they work 10 hours a week and minimum wage is $10 an hour, they have to have a paycheck for that week for at least $100. Now, if you do a commission structure and their commission is higher than that, then pay them the commission rate. But at a minimum, you'll have to owe them minimum wage. And that, again, is for W-2 employees. Sick pay, that's something that is a requirement in most states, that they're accruing some sort of sick pay, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, payroll taxes. All of those things would fall under federal laws. They're employment laws that protect the employee, right? And so those are the things that you're going to want to know: meal periods, breaks, how long can they work, overtime. All of those things are things that you can start to learn about. Now, it can seem very overwhelming. I hear that all the time. Like, I just don't even know where to begin. A great resource to look at when you're starting to hire out employees to understand your legal obligation is talk to an employment law attorney. They would be able to give you a very thorough understanding of what your responsibilities are. but also looking at the SBA.gov. Again, US only. That's the Small Business Administration, SBA.gov. We'll link it up in the show notes for you for quick access. And there's a section in there that talks about growing your business and building out and hiring a team. So you'll need to have the tax paperwork on their first day, their W-2s and their I-9s. That means that they're legally able to work in this country. So there's a lot of great resources there in the steps that you're going to need to get somebody set up to become an employee of yours. And then it'll be your due diligence to know what laws you need to follow to stay compliant. Also, you can look at your, like in California, it's the Employee Development Department, but anywhere it's the employment regulating agency in your state, Google it because it's going to be different for each state. But really that is the first thing you're going to want to know when you're thinking about hiring on a team member, because the second you bring somebody on as a team member, whether they're a 1099 independent contractor, those terms are used interchangeably, or they're a W-2, there's going to be different regulations and different levels of control that you're going to want to know, so you don't get sued and you don't lose your business. The third thing that you're going to want to know ever before hiring your first team member is have your go-to professionals, right? You're going to need to have people on your team in the sense of like people that can advise you on things that you're not an expert in, an accountant and a lawyer at a minimum. Those would be the two that you would want to know who to call, who to talk to when shit goes down. Pardon my language. That's how serious it is. An accountant you should have ongoing. The accountant should always be saving you more money than they cost you. I promise you that. If you find good accountants, they will be well worth the money that you invest in them. They really could take on that CFO, that chief financial officer in your business, to tell you not only historically what your business has done and what that might mean for the future, but also to help you plan for the future and your growth, especially when you start to add on team members. That accountant could be somebody that does payroll. They could do the bookkeeping transactions. So they're categorizing things so that you have data to make informed decisions. I always recommend, at least at a minimum, if you haven't started with an accountant, that you just create an Excel spreadsheet. You're going to track all the money coming in and the money going out, and you're going to have a basic profit and loss statement. When you start to add in an accountant, they can use softwares like QuickBooks. That's really easy for them or your bookkeeper or even you to go in and categorize transactions where it belongs. So you can even break it down by services, right? So I can say, I've done this amount of money in full sets this month and this amount of fills and this amount of retail. It can get that detailed. You can talk about how much it costs you in your labor costs. And then you can see, you know, my rent was this percentage of my total sales. So it really is great data to help you make informed decisions on the business based on data rather than feelings. Your feelings are going to lie to you, especially if you're a woman. Your feelings are going to be all over the place depending on the time of the month. So the more data we can have with the business, the more informed and wise decisions we can make for the business rather than based on feelings, which may or may not be accurate, especially if you have no idea about the financials. You won't know if your business is successful or not if you don't have financial data. So accountants can help with that. Lawyers, now here's the thing, people have this assumption that lawyers are crazy expensive, and they definitely can be, especially if you get sued, right? However, there are ways that you can meet with an attorney just as a consultation. Now, they're not giving you legal advice, but they can educate you on certain aspects. Now, if they're talking about your business specifically, or they're having to review contracts or create contracts, then that's when the paid component comes in. But you can meet with an attorney to discuss your needs. They can tell you what they can tell you. And then you can look at what paid options might be there. You don't necessarily have to have an attorney on retainer. That may not even be necessary, but you should have a reference for somebody who understands contracts, right? And can create your employment contracts for your team member so that your business is protected. That could include, and for W-2s only, for independent contractors, non-competes, non-solicitations don't apply. Again, check with your attorney, but those are generally just for W-2 employees. You can have non-competes and non-solicitation agreements. You should also have an attorney draft up or review your client waivers or your release of liability and your employment contract. That establishes the legal relationship between the business and the employee. So those are things that would be most likely a one-time fee, well worth the money, because if you don't have that in place, then you could have team members that you spend all this time, money, energy in training up, and then you build them a clientele, and then they take the client's information and they go start their own business. And you've just built that team member's business without any protections for the business that you're building and your brand, because the clients of your business are property of the business. They're an asset of the business. And if you're not protecting that asset, then a team member could come in and take that asset. And you would have no ways to have any sort of ramification for that team member. So that's the basics of knowing an accountant, utilizing an accountant and an attorney. Now, again, before you hire your first person, I would start to interview people and make sure that I have those relationships in place, right? So even if I don't use the lawyer quite yet, I want to know I've interviewed 3 lawyers, or I've researched 3 lawyers, or I've gotten recommendations for 3 lawyers. And this one I think is going to be a really great fit for me. So when I'm ready to bring on that team member, I'm ready to get the employment contract in place, I've got my go-to person, rather than, oh, there's this amazing team member, but I don't have the contracts in place. And then I'm just going to keep putting it off and then never get around to it until it gets expensive or the team member leaves. So I will get into in next week's episode a little bit more about the difference between W-2s and 1099s. So W-2 is an actual employee of the business, and that is mostly when people are building out a team. That's the vision they have of an employee. And a 1099 is an independent contractor. Really, for simplicity terms, we're just going to call that a booth renter, because that's really the only way that legally that structure tends to work out. And even that, I don't even know that we call it a 1099 other than they're subletting a space from your overall building. You then essentially become their landlord because you have no control. So we'll get into that in next week's episode. So make sure you stay tuned for that, because that's going to be really important for you to understand the difference between a W-2 employee and a 1099 independent contractor. The 4th thing to know before hiring your first team member is what hiring a team is and what hiring a team is not. Most lash artists, most beauty business owners, solo people, when they think about hiring on a team member, they're like, great, I can start to work less and make more. I can go sit on a beach in Mexico and the business is still making money. And I'm still making money. And so this is a really great way for me to move out of trading my time for money and have all of this money coming in, and I get to work less and make more. That ain't it, sis. Not for a very long time. It could be eventually, but that may take years for that to actually become a reality. And it doesn't happen overnight at all. In fact, it probably will require more work from you in the short term than if you're looking to work less and make more. Here's my advice. Raise your prices. Keep it simple. Just be you. Raise your prices, lower your hours, and call it good. You're working less and you're making more. That's the quickest and easiest way to work less and make more. Building out a team is not working less and not making more for quite some time. It can happen quicker. I have one of my mastermind members. She was a one-on-one client, and now she's moving. She's in the mastermind now. We started working together in August of last year, and she is now at the point where we are working her out of doing services. And she has 3 team members right now, and she's looking to add a 4th. So that's happened in less than a year that she has grown to that level where she is now fully stepping into her managing the business and her team and no longer trading time for money. Is a beautiful place to be in. I've been working with people who it's taken over a year for them to get to that point because of their own obstacles and their own beliefs and their own pace. Because here's what ends up happening. When you're ready to bring on a team member, chances are that you're really busy with clients, right? And so the motivation is, I keep getting demand for my services, yet I'm out of time to be able to give more of my time, or I don't want to give more of my time, but yet I am turning away money. So it almost comes from the start from a scarcity place with money. I'm turning away business. Therefore, I'm losing money rather than looking at, wow, I've got a lot of demand and I've got a lot of power in where my income goes. So if you don't have the time currently to train a team member in a way that gets them set up for success, how are you ever going to have somebody who is a revenue producing machine even at half the level that you could do, much less in competition with you, right? Ideally, we're training on team members who can do what we do as far as services better than we could do. But then our ego gets involved. I'm like, well, my clients only want me. Well, my clients won't go to the new team member. Well, yeah, because you haven't trained them to be just like you. Well, what if I train the team member? Then they're going to get really good. And then they're going to go open up their own shop. And then I've just trained my competition. Well, yes, turnover is part of what you're signing up for when you add on a team. It's just the nature of the beast. Not everybody's going to stay with you for 30 plus years. That's not the world we live in anymore. But I think if you can get 2 years out of a team member, you've gotten plenty of return on your investment into time and money into that team member. So what I want you to focus on is that you need the time and capacity to build out the systems and processes to create revenue producing machines, which would be your team members. When you are building out a team, you are actually starting to delegate out the services of your business so that you can start to pull back and work on the management of the business. I want you to get to a place, if you're ever going to build out a team, to be okay with at some point, you no longer being a service provider. Now, a lot of you are like, no, I love the artistry. I always want to have my hand in it and blah, 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 blah. Your ego is wrapped around it because you find so much worth and value in being the service provider. You get the validation from your clients that you're amazing. Nobody's like you. Nobody will ever be like you. That's not effective for your business. And I'll tell you why. And you probably heard me talk about this if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, is your CEO hourly rate, right? So you can go back to the episode about building out a six-figure business. We will link it in the show notes. I don't have the exact episode number off my top of my head, but essentially, if you look at the amount of revenue you want to produce and you want to plan out how many hours a week in a year that you're going to work. So if you want to take 2 weeks off a year for vacation, or you want to take holidays off or whatever, loop that in to how many hours in a year you'll work. Now, usually when I go through this exercise, the women that I'm walking this exercise through, they want to take about 4 weeks off in a year, which is great. So it ends up being about 2,000 work hours are available in a year for the CEO to work. And if you want to do $200,000, your CEO hourly rate is about $100 an hour. So if you're doing any task that you wouldn't pay somebody else $100 an hour for, then chances are you're paying yourself doing that, or you're costing money for the business because you could be doing other things to grow the business. Now, when you are in the treatment room with the client, even if you're doing it for, let's say you charge $100 for an hour fill and you have clients and that's who you're taking, the business is only generating $100 for that hour. Whereas if we take you out of the treatment room and we put other people in there, right? And you've got 2 team members that now you're marketing to get 2 new clients in at that $100 an hour rate, even $75 an hour. Let's say they don't produce as good a work and you don't want them to charge as much. So let's just say that's $75 an hour. Your time outside of the treatment room doing the marketing to get 2 $75 an hour clients in is now bringing in the business $150 for that hour, as opposed to you being in the treatment room, locked in there without the ability to do anything else for the business. You can only make $100 for that hour. And that's the shift that needs to start to happen as you go from being the solo business owner, where your time is being traded for money, to now having a scalable business where your time can actually help exponentially grow your business. And that's really where the power of scaling a business and building out a team comes into play, because now all of a sudden, the time that you spend working on the business can have a multiplier effect, right? And that's where we start to stop trading our time for money and we create what's called scalable revenue, which means that, again, you're not limited by the amount of hours in a day that you have in order to grow your business. Because like we've seen with my Momentum Mastermind member, she now has 3 and even a 4th team member coming on. So her time during an hour, instead of being stuck in the treatment room, can now be used to generate new clients for 4 team members. And that is how we get scalable revenue. So a team, building out a team is not getting a warm body in there, is not just trying to throw money and 50% commission at somebody. So hopefully that they'll build a clientele and they'll be happy, and then the clients will be happy and everybody will be happy, and you'll still be fully booked and not paying yourself well, because that team member is going to know that you don't care necessarily about them. They're only going to be in it for the money. And after 50% commission, how much higher can you go and still be profitable? Right? If you're thinking about, oh, after 6 months, I'll give her another 5% commission. My God, those lemons in the water don't buy themselves, right? The booking software doesn't just magically exist. Everything costs money. And so the more revenue you're throwing at a team member, the less money is coming in for the business to even function. This is where salon owners who build out teams stay stuck taking clients, because that's the only way that the business can stay open, is if the owner is still producing through taking clients. And sometimes that's the only way the owner pays themselves, is through the tips that the clients give them, because everything else is going back into the business. That is not a sustainable business model. And that absolutely leads to burnout. And it also leads to resentment that your business is killing you because you're working so much and you're taking a full load of clients, and then you're trying to run the business and manage the team members. And then you get entitled team members who are like, I'm not making enough money at 50% commission. I should be making 60%. If I'm going to go leave and do booth rental, and I'm going to take all these clients. It is not a pretty picture. That is not what building out a team is. So if you want to build out a team legally and profitably, I've got a way for you to look into doing that. Number 5, the fifth thing that you need to know before hiring your team, your first team member, is get in the habit of paying yourself consistently now. We don't wait till we build out a team. We don't wait to a certain revenue level to pay ourselves consistently, because paying yourself consistently is a discipline, not a destination. I'm going to say that again. It's that powerful. Paying yourself is a discipline, not a destination, which means that you don't get to X amount of dollars in revenue and then you start to pay yourself. No, my friend. Just like saving money, paying yourself is a discipline, not a destination. So get consistent with it. I don't care if it's $10 a week to start somewhere. Same thing with savings. If you're not in the habit of savings or having, 3 to 6 months of operating expenses set aside for a rainy day, or God forbid, a pandemic, who saw that coming, right? It is the discipline of setting aside what you do have. There's something called Parkinson's theory. And that is essentially that you will use up whatever resources you have available. So if I only have $100 to spend on running my business, I'm going to make it work because I have $100 and that's all I have. But if all of a sudden I have $1,000, I'm still going to spend and find a way to make $1,000. Same thing with your money, right? So if I can only pay myself $20, well, then you should be paying yourself $20 instead of waiting until, well, I don't want to pay myself until I can at least pay myself $1,000. Why? Why would you wait? You could be paying yourself now, even if it's not the goal you want to be at. It is the discipline of paying yourself that becomes the skill set you need to work on. Because I hear this all the time, and I will tell you, I've had people with 3 locations and 16 team members, and the first thing they wanted to work with me on is being able to pay themselves. And the goal was for them to pay themselves $3,000 a month, when across their 3 locations, they were doing about $40,000 a month. I get that all the time. When these people who look like they're crazy successful because they have multiple locations, their first goal is to start to pay themselves. And you know what? You guys can get this for free because you're listening to the podcast. You know what I told her? I said, great, pay yourself that money tomorrow. She's like, but no, you pay yourself first. It's like a basic finance principle, especially when it comes to personal finance. Pay yourself first, because then you will find how to run your business with whatever's remaining. Right? Now, we don't want to steal from the business. If the business is not profitable, that's the first area to fix. Right? But when it comes to building out a team and all of that, we don't sacrifice our income to build out the team. We get our income solid first and then build out the team, because otherwise you're going to be making decisions based off of scarcity and fear because you're not paying yourself a livable wage. Now, you may not be at the wage that you're like, buying houses, doing Airbnbs, investing in the stock market, driving the Mercedes. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you paying yourself a livable wage where you're not worried about making bills and rent and payments for a month, right? So get in the habit and get to the point where you're paying yourself consistently. The way that I recommend doing that, especially if you want to build out a team, is start yourself on payroll. Even at minimum wage, start yourself there. So get in the habit of you clocking in. You're going to get paid minimum wage, whatever your state's minimum wage is, and write yourself a paycheck or run payroll every 2 weeks. That will get you in the habit so that when a new team member comes on, you already know how to train them on, here's how you're going to clock in. You're already in the habit of running payroll. You're already in the habit of transferring money from different accounts to be able to run payroll and allocate expenses so that you have enough money in the bank account to run payroll. And you can work with your accountant on doing bonuses, whether it's monthly or quarterly, if the business is profitable, so that you can pay yourself more. But at a minimum, start yourself off on payroll, because it's so much easier to get a team member onboarded with payroll and for you to already be in the habit of doing payroll, because the last thing you want to do is bring a team member on and not be able to pay them. We don't want that. That would be a very, very not fun situation, right? So get in the habit with yourself first. And I highly recommend, and we use in our business, gusto.com. Other payroll companies are ADP, Paychex, at least here in the US. I'm not a huge fan of those. I love the simplicity of Gusto. The other beautiful thing about Gusto is they also have an HR option where you can have, basically they'll tell you what laws are coming up, how to stay compliant. It will keep you posted on the HR, the human resources side of staying compliant in your business. And that's a really great feature. We've got a link for you to get $100 off or get a $100 Visa gift card if you use the link that we'll include in the show notes. But I love Gusto, gusto.com. That's what we use. That's what we recommend all of our mastermind members to use. So I hope these 5 things were something to give you some food for thought. If you're interested in building out a team, again, the 5 things to know before you hire is get a handle on the business finance, know the comings and goings of money in your business, the laws and regulations surrounding being an employer in your city or state, your go-to pros, especially an accountant or a lawyer what hiring a team is and what it's not. And lastly, getting in the habit of paying yourself consistently now, ideally putting yourself on payroll now. I hope you'll join me next week as I break down why hiring independent contractors is bad for business and could cost you everything, including your business and even your home. I also want to assure you, if it is your dream to build out a team legally and profitably, I've got some crazy successful women I'm going to introduce you to in the coming weeks who have had incredible growth, transformations, and some major obstacles that they were facing that they are now in consistent revenue growth and building out a team. And they are killing it both legally and profitably in growing out a team. So I'm very excited to introduce you to these women in the coming weeks. And yeah, I hope you'll join me inside next week as we go over why independent contractors is bad for business. Until next time, have a good one.